Our scripture today is found in the book of Judges chapter 7. We're going to read verses 1 through 8, and we're going to talk about a little bit more than just those 8 verses. But we're looking at the 300. And no, we're not looking at the Battle of Theopolis, the Greek 300. But we could draw some comparisons between them, and we probably will. So this is not based on a graphic novel or on a movie that came out, I guess, in 2006. This is the biblical account, which actually takes place a couple hundred years before the Battle of Theopolis. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So let's look here at Judges chapter 7 and dig into it a little bit. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Morah. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands, in order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her. Announce now to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. But the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. If I say this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, he shall not go." So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel down to drink." 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the other men go, each to his own place." So Gideon sent the rest of Israel to their tents, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. Now the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. So we've been looking at Gideon for a couple of weeks now. This is our third week actually exploring Gideon himself and what he does. And if you remember, Gideon starts out as this fearful guy who he's trying to thresh wheat in the wine press. And God says, "Hey, you mighty man of valor, you courageous warrior, hey, I'm going to go deliver the Midians into your hand. All right, I'm going to drive them out of this land by you." Okay? And so we have that idea that Gideon started out as a man full of fear. And we kind of see him grow a little bit and a little bit. We skipped over last week. We skipped over a section where Gideon actually starts doing what he's called to do. All right? And so as we come into our verse today, it says, early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and that name Jerubbaal comes from that section that we skipped over. All right? That section where we skipped over, Gideon takes 10 of his father's servants. And so this is one of the reasons why I think Gideon's actually a younger man, is because everything he's doing happens to be with his father's stuff. You know, it's one of those things of as you grow up, you accumulate your own resources, your own tools. You stop going over to your father-in-laws and saying, "Hey, could I borrow this?" Right? Because you go, I borrowed this enough times, I get my own. So Gideon borrows 10 servants of his father's. He borrows his father's oxen, all right? And he goes into his father's backyard and tears down a altar to Baal and this pole where people would worship other gods in improper worship. Well, any worship to another god is improper, so that's kind of redundant. And so when he did this, the people in the area, they got upset. Well, actually, the day after he did this, because Gideon, again, was that man of fear, and so he did it at night, so nobody around him could see what he was doing, and so he had 10 men that he trusted, right? 10 men who were willing to help him tear this down. And when they got upset and they got angry, they wanted to really attack Gideon, and Gideon's father said, "No, the only person he has offended here is Baal, and so let Baal take his vengeance on him. Let Baal contend with him." All right? And that name there, Jerubbaal, means Baal contends with. All right? And I point that out because in our verse here, we have God looking at this army, and he says, we need to whittle this down, otherwise you guys are going to take the credit for this. And what we find in that earlier section that we had skipped is, guess who never gets the credit for what happened there? Right? They don't say, God is the one that Baal has to contend with, which is the actual truth. Right? He could contend with Gideon like Gideon were a little ant if it weren't for God. Right? It turns out in spiritual matters, we aren't that great without the power of God. Without God, we can do nothing. In fact, Jesus says this, and I put it in your bulletin for you. He says this in John chapter 15, verse 5. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit. For without me, you can do nothing. And so, Gideon himself cannot contend with Baal. Right? You and I, we may resist the devil, but we can't do it in our own strength. Right? We can't do it on our own. And it is hubris to think we can. We need the Lord to do that. And so when we are able to stand and resist the devil, when we are able to contend with powers and principalities, we must recognize that we do so in the strength of God, and therefore God must get the glory, and therefore God should be Jerubbaal, not Gideon. But Gideon takes the praise. Right? The people are enamored with Gideon. And if that's not enough, Gideon takes the praise and it goes out to the world. Right? The world is getting to know who Gideon is. And all he did was in the middle of the night, he went and broke an altar. We call people who do that nowadays hoodlums. Right? He was a hoodlum. And granted, he was doing it for the right reasons. He was doing what he was supposed to do. He should have done it in the broad daylight because God was with him and God told him to do it. But it gets spread out to the point that even the Midianites know who Gideon is. And all he did was took 10 men and he destroyed an altar. But the Midianites know who Gideon is. In fact, as Gideon goes down to spy on the camp in a little bit, he goes down and they had a dream that God gave them, and they go, that means that Gideon here, Jerubbaal, is going to come in and he's going to destroy the camp. Right? So his name has gotten some fame. He's gotten some glory, and really the glory belongs to God. And so God's looking at this number here and he's saying, you got 32,000 men. We need to whittle that down because otherwise you guys are going to take the glory for yourselves. It's actually really easy for us to do that. God uses us for something and we go, look at what I did, right? I'm going to pick on Daniel for a second here. Daniel wants to be a fisherman, right? He wants to go out and throw the line in and reel the line in. Well, so I'm his father and I'm supposed to take him fishing. I'm not a fisherman. I should put that out there. I don't like fishing. I don't care about it. Apparently Sarah likes it, so I think this year she's getting the license and taking the kids. They might go more often. But the first time Daniel and I went fishing was at a lake, at Pathfinder Lodge where we used to work. And I cast out the line. I get a fish on the line, start reeling it in. And I call Daniel over, put the fishing pole in his hands for the last second, and reel the fish in. And he's like, look at the fish I caught. Right? And his father wants him to be encouraged about fishing because he likes it. And so, yeah, you caught a fish. And one of the staff members goes, actually, technically, you didn't catch that fish. It's to shut your mouth. Right? But the reality is we like to take the glory. We like to be, look at what I did. I have students who, Mr. Bush, can you help me with this paper? Can you help me with this? Can you help? And you walk them step by step through their paper. And then they say, so what's my grade? Well, it's 100 because I kind of wrote it for you. Right here. I got 100. Look at how good I did on this paper. Yeah, well, I kind of did it for you. I mean, you got to do a little bit of it on your own at some point, right? But the reality is that without God, we can't do it. And God deserves all the glory. And so he's noting this human propensity to take the glory. And he says, look, we're going to take away your ability to do that. We're going to take away your ability to do that, and we're going to whittle you down. We're going to kind of take away your numbers. And I should probably give you this statistic here. There are 32,000 Israelites. 32,000 of them. We're going to find out that there's like 132,000 footmen, not just soldiers, but just the footmen, the ones who march on their feet of the other guys, right? And of these 32,000, the Israelites, they're not soldiers. They're not warriors. Half of them probably just have a hoe or a pitchfork in their hands. They're farmers. They're not men of war. And so you got this extreme already. You go, wow, that's a large difference. That's a 4-to-1. And he says the camels of the enemy, so the mounted soldiers, are so many that they are like the sands of the sea, or sands of the beach, right? You can't count them. That's how many, that's how great the multitude is. And God says, you got too many because you'll still take the credit. You'll still try to take the glory. And so he says, you got to whittle them down. And what we're going to see is there are 3 types of people, or 3 things in the people that God chooses here. And the first thing we see in the people that God chooses is all 32,000 of them, at least they showed up. Right? Because this is not all of Israel. This is only a couple of the tribes. This is only a couple of the people from those tribes. But they were at least willing, right? And that's the first thing we really need to be for God, is willing. You know, how many times have you met people who, like, yeah, God wants me to do this, but I just don't want to. You know, we read about Jonah. Jonah didn't want to. Why did Jonah not want to? Was it because he didn't believe God could do it? No, it was because he believed God would do it. Right? Jonah didn't want to go talk to the people of Nineveh because he knew God would forgive them. Right? He didn't want to do it. You know, when Paul is at the road to Damascus, he's asked, why are you kicking against the goads? Right? Why are you kicking against these sharp things? Why are you pushing against what you know to be right? Right? You know you should be doing this. Why don't you do it? Because I don't want to. Right? Because I really don't want to. I don't want that to be right. We know what's right. We covered that last week, right? We know the will of God, and there's something in us that says, right, we don't want to. All right, so the first thing to be used by God is we got to be willing. All 32,000 of these people are willing. You know, God, I want to say God doesn't force you to do something you're not willing to do, but God will make it so that you might want to be willing to do that thing. Right? Jonah wasn't willing until after a little while of realizing that, no, I'd rather be willing to do what God told me to do than do the opposite. Right? It's better to do what God told you to do the first time than to have to sit in the belly of a whale for 3 days. 3 days and 3 nights. Kind of a scary thing to think about. But these guys, they're willing. God is glorified when we are willing to do what he calls us to do. When we are willing to step out into the world and share the gospel. When we're willing to forgive, even when it hurts. When we're willing to love, even when those we love are being mean and cruel to us. God calls us to be willing. The second thing we see is we got this in here, verse 3. He says, announce to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. Right? And so 22,000 leave. Right? So the next thing we need to be, it's not fearless. That would be, people might look at that and go, we need to be fearless. He doesn't say anybody who is without fear, period. No, he says anyone who trembles with fear. Anyone who is allowing the fear to control them. Let them leave. Right? And There are lots of things we could look at in this. If we jumped over to Deuteronomy 20, I didn't put this in the bulletin for you, and I'm not going to actually jump over there. I'm just going to tell you what it says. Deuteronomy 20 gives us 4 reasons why you could be excused from military services in Israel. 4 reasons why when the trumpet is sound and you're called in for action, you can say, I'm going to go home. I got some other stuff to do. And the first 3 all kind of revolve around, I have some immediate responsibilities to my family that I need to take care of. First one, I just built a house and we haven't even moved in yet. Let me go move my family in. Let me get my family settled. That's the first one. Second one is, I just got married, right? And my wife and I got betrothed, we're engaged, and we haven't finished the marriage process yet. Let me go take care of my wife first. Right? And the third one is, I just planted my vineyards, right? I just planted them, and I need to take care of them so that my family has food to eat, right? First 3 are all about taking care of the family first. And the reality is that's the way it's supposed to be. Family first, then the church community, and then the community at large. That's the progress of things. That's the order of things. And then the fourth one is, if you're afraid and trembling, you may go. And in Deuteronomy, they give a reason for this, right? And the reason for this is because if you're afraid and allowing your fear to control you, your fear may pass on to the guy next to you. And so on and so forth. Because it turns out that fear is a contagious thing. You know, we share fear. I think we share fear quicker than we've shared the COVID, right? It's easier. It spreads quicker. In fact, you don't even need to be in any proximity to each other to spread fear. You know, we've got the TV to do that for us now, right? Just turn on the news and we will spread fear. And fear, when it controls you, takes you out. It takes out a whole army. So he says, if they're afraid that they can go, this is one of the reasons why. But I think there's something else about this as well that we can see, is that fear, when we allow fear to control us, it's a lack of faith. It's a lack of trust, right? Because trust says, yeah, I may be scared, but you told me to do this, and so I'm going to step out and do it. I've used this illustration before, but you probably don't remember it. It's very vivid in my mind because it's my fear. I'm afraid of heights. I've always been afraid of heights as long as I can remember. I don't know, maybe my parents dropped me as a kid. Actually, I do know they did drop me as a kid. They dropped all of us, so except for my sister. So I don't know why. I think they love her more. But I'm afraid of heights. And so I've gone on several ravine hikes, up these high ravines, steep ravines, scary ravines, and there have been a couple of times when I have gone into a ravine and just fear has taken over. And so fear takes over and I just start trying to get out of there any way possible. That panic sets in. And generally when I would go on ravine hikes, I would take some friends with me. And my friends would say, no, Gary, come here. We're going to take you. And my friends were always like 6 foot something, weighing $150. Like they weigh nothing. You could pick them up and throw them with one hand. Sort of a thing. And they would take me through and be like, look, we can jump on this, we can do this. This is good footing, put your foot here. And so fear would say, no, I can't put my foot there. You're crazy, I can't do that. And, you know, their stride was longer than I am tall. So they would be like, you can put your foot 6 feet from where you're standing. No, I can't. What are you talking about? They go, don't worry, we're here to catch you. Okay, you're here to catch me. Who's going to catch you, right? That's all that stuff that goes through your mind. Fear controls. But, you know, eventually, at the end of the day, I had to learn to trust my friends. And they would give me their hands and they would make footholds with their own bodies when necessary. And they got me out of the ravine. Trust overcomes fear. Trust allows us to control fear, to say, you know what, I may be scared, but you're telling me this, you're greater than this, and so therefore we can do it. And so the reality is, God isn't just sending these guys away because, hey, you're going to just destroy the army, because you know what, God doesn't need the army, right? He doesn't need any of them. He could do this with one man. He could do this without a man. if he chose to. In fact, we see with Elisha's sitting there, and he's got an army around him, surrounding him, and Elisha's servants like, shouldn't we run away? Aren't you scared? And Elisha says, oh, God, open his eyes. And God opens the man's eyes, and the man sees thousands of spiritual angels around them, surrounding them, an army of hosts, right, to protect them. So God doesn't need any of these men. He doesn't need the 300 even. But God's not going to use you, A, if you're not willing, and B, if you don't trust him. So I think that the issue of fear is more an issue of trust. And the reality is, if I lack trust in God, my faithlessness may actually spread to you and cause you to not trust God too. And I've seen it in the workplace an awful lot. You're thinking you got a leader who says, hey, we're going to do this, and then somebody comes up and goes, what do you think of that? I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's a bad idea. And they can't talk the loyal subjects, I'll call us, into disloyalty to some extent, right? Into a lack of trust. So God lets the 22,000 go because they don't have trust in him. They don't have faith in him. If we want to be used by God, we want to have faith in him. And the reality is, if we're doing it and we don't have faith in God, you know what's going to happen? Well, we go back to the first point that we had of we're very good at taking the glory for ourselves. I didn't trust God, but I did it. Look at what I did. I'm so great. I'm awesome. I didn't get myself out of that ravine. Kevin and Dan got me out of that ravine. And they had to do it multiple times, I should point out, because we had to do this year after year. We had to go up the ravine. So by the last time, I was able to trust them real easy with going. I never got out the right way, though. I just couldn't do it. But we go on, all right? So he has these 22,000 men. 22,000 men left them. And so they're left with 10,000. And the 10,000 are probably looking around going, oh man, what's going to happen now? They had a 4-1 to the foot soldiers. Now they're like 14-1. The odds aren't in their favor anymore. They weren't to begin with. And so they're looking around, but God told us to do this, and he's been good so far. We'll do it. Gideon's here with us. Gideon's Gideon, right? And God says, you got too many people. And we're going, wait a minute, we just got rid of over a third of us. What do you mean we got too many people? And then we get the separation here. The separation through the drinking. And there are lots of different explanations for this, lots of different reasons why people think, hey, God got rid of this group because of that, right? One of my favorites is that God got rid of the group that knelt down because they were careless. They were so focused on their own physical desires of drinking that they didn't care about anything else. And they just went all in. And then there's the most popular one tends to be, the people who took the water up in their hands and lapped it up like this. They were alert and ready to attack, and they were watching the enemy, and they were the better soldiers. They were great soldiers. And I was watching some preachers preach about this, and one of them made the point, which really destroys that argument of God is doing this for his glory. He doesn't want the best soldiers. He doesn't want the best warriors. In fact, he wants the worst ones, right? He wants the ones who are incompetent. He wants the Gomer Piles, because we all like Andy Griffith, right? The incompetent sheriff, the incompetent deputy, right? He wants them because it's through them he's going to get glory. Through the weak, not the strong. I think the reason why he took the guys who lapped up, one of the reasons, it may be because they were alert, but I think it's because they were alert to hear. They were alert to obey, right? See, we got to be willing, we got to be trusting, we got to be ready to do what God's called us to do, right? There's that, but the end-all answer is he doesn't tell us why he chooses the ones lapping up. Because, there could be good reasons to take the ones who threw themselves down on the ground and put their heads right in the water. Because those guys are wild. Those guys are strong. Those guys are all in. Why not take those guys? Well, because they were the larger number. Right? That's all we really know is they were the larger number. Right? God took the few, the proud. Right? Not the Marines, though. Because the Marines could do something on their own. He took the 300. The 300 sorriest, saddest, most group of people. But they were willing, they trusted him, and they were ready to do whatever he called them to do. Right? And so we have these 300. And now these 300, they're called to go in and take out the Midianites. And we're going to jump into the battle just a little bit because I want you to see how God gets the glory. Right? In that last verse there in verse 8, so Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. Right? What doesn't it mention there? What didn't they take? What are they missing that every good soldier needs, right? They're missing swords. They're missing weapons. They've got trumpets. They've got food. They've got jars and torches. But they don't have swords. They don't have spears. They don't have the slingshot, right? Which actually, I don't think it's invented quite yet. They're missing the things needed for war. Right? Here we have the 300, and they're going to go into war without a weapon. Because if they had a weapon, they could say, look, we did that. But no, they go down against Midian, right? After Gideon needs yet another sign, because Gideon needs all those signs. He needs God to really firm up that God's telling him what to do stuff, I guess after a while, you might want to get used to the voice of God and just, all right, God, you told me to do this, I'll do it. But no, God said, look, if you need another sign, go down and observe. And he goes down and observes and finds out that God gave the Midianites a dream that Gideon was coming, and that Gideon was going to come into their midst, and they were going to be destroyed at the hand of Gideon. So Gideon goes back up. He gets his 300 men. He takes those 300 men, and he surrounds the Midianites with the 300 men. And if you remember your Sunday school, you remember this story, right? He takes the trumpets. They blow the trumpets. They break their jars. They light their torches. And so it looks as though a whole host of an army surrounds them. And they shout out, for the Lord and for Gideon. And just shouting that out and all that spectacle, the people seeing them standing up for God, causes such havoc in the camp of the Midianites that the Midianites start killing each other because they don't know who's an enemy, who's a friend, and they just start fighting, and they fight each other and end up taking each other out so that only God can get the glory here. Right? Only God could have the glory for this because it wasn't the 300. They didn't pick up a sword yet. They haven't killed a single guy. And they take that army of 132,000 and they get it so that they are so small that they run and flee for their lives. And I told you I would compare this 300 with the 300 of Theophilus, right? The 300 of, the Greek 300, that would come a couple hundred years later, they were the best of the best. They were in the best place possible to have this fight in it. And they lost. They put up a good fight. They allowed their brothers and sisters to escape, to regroup, and then later they would come in and conquer. But this 300, who is the worst of the worst, are so dependent upon God that God gets the glory because they win. Right? The real 300 won. Gideon's 300 win because it was God who did the fighting for them. And the reality in our lives is that we need to be willing. We need to trust him. We need to be ready when he calls us to act. And the reality is, when he calls us to act, the battle he calls us to do, is done through our voices. It's done by sharing the word of God. It's done by speaking truth into the world. So only God can get the glory. I remember talking with a minister, and I talk about this often, who would like to boast, I saved 5 people today. I saved 10 people this week. Oh, you didn't save a single person. You spoke words into their lives that God gave you to speak. God used you to bring these people to him. Because the glory belongs to God. And so in everything we do, everywhere we go, let us remember that we can do nothing without God. That all the glory is due him. Right? That's what it says in Isaiah 42. He says, I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory I will not give to another, nor my praise to carved images. All the glory belongs to God. God says that. Paul says it in Romans 11. He says, oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and his ways past finding out. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has become his counselor, or who has first given to him, and it shall be repaid to him? For of him and through him and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen. God is the one to be glorified because God is the one who is capable. God is the one who does it, and we can't even comprehend it. So let us give glory to God in everything we do. Let us give glory to him by being willing, by being trusting, and by being ready, so that he can win this world through us. Because the reality is he doesn't need us. If we chose not to shout out, if we chose not to share the gospel, then the trees will do it. The rocks will do it. And let's not let them cry out in our place. Let's do what God's called us to do. Will you bow with me in prayer?